We should be good. Thank you. Now recording is in progress. Welcome, everybody. It is nice to have you here, those who are here with us in person, and those of you who did not want to deal with the downtown Salt Lake during the preparation for this weekend. We're happy to see you online. So what is it that's going on outside here that they're doing? What event do they have going on out here?
So right outside our front door of our office in the Olympic Plaza Gateway, they are building a structure, which is actually a snowboard hill. So there's going to be snowboard tricks that are going to happen starting tomorrow and on Saturday. So if anybody wants to come back and hang out with us tomorrow and check out the events, you can. Actually, you don't know this, but Ted is an accomplished snowboarder. He's competing, actually. I'm just kidding. He's not, but that would be really cool.
All righty. Let's go ahead and introduce everybody that is here on, well, we'll just start down with Rosie.
Rosie Hernandez with Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Jordan Chandler with Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Joe Smoka, Immigration Canyon.
Beth Holbrook, Utah Transit Authority.
Andrew Gruber, I'm Executive Director here at WFRC.
Mark Shepard, Clearfield City Mayor.
Wayne Binion, WFRC staff.
Kevin Cromar, Utah Air Quality Board.
Doyle Gerard, Lake Point City.
Carolyn Lundberg, Mayor of Linden City and representing MAG.
Carrie Newell, UDOT.
Mike Sopchuk, WFRC staff.
Miranda Jones-Cox, WFRC staff.
Ben Withrich, WFRC staff.
And Granado Salt Lake County Council.
Ted Knowlton, Deputy Director, WFRC.
Thank you. And then Rosie, you want to tell us who we have online?
All right, we have Jared Hamner, Mayor Tammy Tran, Mayor Natalie Hall, Rob Dolly, Andrea Pearson, Ann Granado, Brad Palmer, Bryce Bird, Ivan Marrero, Nathan Terpesky, and Shul Bishop. If I missed anyone, please drop your name in the chat for the record. Thank you.
Dan, did you note Dan Dugan also? Just looking around here. Okay, hi. Okay.
Dan Dugan.
And I'd like to welcome our new members to Transcom. Mayor, you want to, we've got both of you actually. We got two of you here and one of you online that I was looking at too. So thank you. We've got Doyle. Did I get that right? Okay, very good. And Carolyn, appreciate you two being here with us. And you're also representing MAG. Very good. And then online, there it is, Jared Hamner. Wave, Jared. It's nice to have you here. Welcome to the committee. And we now have our legislative update. And we have minutes. Excuse me. We have minutes that were sent out from our last meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Somebody want to make a motion then?
I move we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Minutes stand, and we'll have our legislative update. And Miranda, we will turn the time over to you.
All right, thanks everyone. Just going to give a brief update on where we're at with the Utah legislative session. We are nearing the end, but not quite there. We have about 12 or 11 working days left of the session, but there's still plenty of time to get much done. So I kind of want to break things out into two pieces of an update. One would be appropriations that we're looking at, actively involved in, advocating for, and then also legislation. Did I say legislation and appropriations? Anyways, we're going to touch both of those things a little bit here. So first we'll touch on appropriations. So right now, kind of the beginning of session, legislative appropriation subcommittees met. They heard a number of appropriation requests from legislators, community partners, state agencies, and they then ranked and prioritized these appropriations. Those appropriations, the ranked appropriations now have gone to the Executive Appropriations Committee, where they'll be ultimately discussed and determined if they'll be funded. This is also dependent upon the amount of revenue that the state has to appropriate. Those numbers, the consensus revenue estimates, will be released at the beginning of next week. And that's when we'll kind of start seeing these pieces firm up and come together as far as appropriations go. So I just wanted to list a number of appropriations that WFRC is supportive of and interested in, of course. A lot of these kind of fall under the multimodal transportation investments umbrella. So active transportation, transit, and roadway. Rosie, would you click the next, or Jordan? Thanks. Oh, sorry, go back. I got a little confused, but a few things that I do want to note that I think are important. So as it relates to active transportation, key appropriation, one that we're very excited about and hope that it will continue to move forward favorably, is funding for the Utah Trails Network. I'll touch on that here shortly, but there is some ongoing and one-time funding that would be put towards the Utah Trails Network, which is a proposal from the governor's office and UDOT for active transportation projects throughout the state to further connect our communities. There's also funding for transit that was ranked, zero fare transit pilot, transit for the Point of the Mountain. And then there was also a number of funding items for roadway, including debt service set aside. So for example, I guess to maybe to explain this a little bit further, the legislature has stated that one of their priorities is kind of not necessarily paying down the transportation debt that the state has, but putting money aside to free up the transportation fund obligation that is paying off the current transportation debt that we have. So you'll see at the bottom, the legislature has ranked nearly $800 million to pay off transportation debt over the coming years. You'll also see some funding recommendations for a state infrastructure bank, additional state infrastructure bank funding. That was around the tune of $100 million, and then $120 million going into the Corridor Preservation Fund at UDOT. So there's all of these appropriations. There's many more than what's just listed here that we're also watching: housing items, air quality items, different things like that. But these are some key ones that we think are worth noting. And Andrew, you look like you're ready to say something.
I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that what you're seeing on the screen in front of you, the numbers on the side, like Utah Trails Network 771, the committee, the Infrastructure and General Government Appropriations Committee that did the rankings, had 71 items that they ranked, 71 one-time funding items they ranked, and that one was number 7 on the list. So that's very good. So you can get a sense of the relative priority that was given by the appropriations committees to these items. And it doesn't mean that any of them definitely will or definitely won't be funded, but you get a flavor for the direction that things are going.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. That's helpful. Sorry for missing that context. Overall, we're feeling very positive about appropriations for transportation this legislative session. We won't ultimately know what will be funded until EAC puts out their funding prioritization lists, and until things are included in the budget bills. But ultimately, we're seeing a lot of funding going towards active transportation, towards transit, and towards roadway. And these long-term one-time investments and some ongoing investments in our transportation system. And it's looking very positively so far. So we're hoping to see it come to fruition. Yeah.
I'm a little out of my depth, assuming it's not plucked out and prioritized? Do we not expect that the items, zero fare transit and transit for the point, do they ever fund down to that level, or will have to be plucked out if it's going to get funded?
Right. So great question. I wouldn't, like Andrew said, I wouldn't say that anything wouldn't be funded under a certain ranking, right? The Executive Appropriations Committee and legislative leadership will often take their own prerogative to fund what they want to be funded. To speak candidly, zero fare transit hasn't been, warmly received by the legislature yet this session. I wouldn't say that it will 100% not happen, but it's not looking favorable yet. Transit for the point, that's to be determined. There hasn't been much discussion about that yet this session, but the legislature has historically put a significant amount of one-time funding for large capital project transit projects like Front Runner, double tracking, as well as Point of the Mountain Transit. And last year, as the legislature, gave UDOT additional authority for capital transit project development, the state kind of assumed a new role in funding and working on transit capital projects. And so there's a possibility that that could receive funding through the EAC process. So
Miranda, I'm noting online, we have a comment from Councilmember Hamner, and Councilmember, maybe I can just ask you to go ahead and state your question so everybody hears it. And I'll also note that for everybody that's online, we want you to feel fully able to participate. So we're watching you and we're watching for your comments. Raise your hand, put a comment in, or just speak up at any point. But Councilmember, go ahead.
Thank you. Hey, what I was asking is talking on transportation. I know in the governor's budget, he put under his budget, one section is transportation. Are we following that and giving support on that? Or do we have some questions on that or monitoring it or opposing it? What's the stance on that?
yeah, great question. So as you can, if you actually compare the list here compared to what was included in the governor's budget, I would say that I actually think all of these items were included in the governor's budget to some extent. Some of the appropriations were prioritized at a higher amount than they were included in the governor's budget. So for example, corridor preservation funding and the state infrastructure bank, those were they had additional funding added to those requests. But all of these items were included in the governor's budget recommendation. Terry could probably speak to this better than I, but UDOT actually includes in their formal recommendations to the legislature transportation recommendations that were included in the governor's budget, which we, of course, at WFRC are very supportive of. So.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
The Utah Trails Network looks like it's being well received. Does that include any proposed mapping of what that might look like, that infrastructure? Or is it just right now an appropriation and then it would be determined later?
Yeah, we'll let Terry speak to that.
So the Utah Trails Network has been proposed. There are two pieces to it. One is the ongoing, which the real importance of that ongoing is everyone in this room understands the importance of good planning. If we have ongoing funding, we can create a plan, create a map, and make sure that we're working with all the local entities and the MPOs across the state, because everybody's been putting maps and plans together, and we want to help represent that all together across the whole state, figure out what the right regional network may be. So it does have the ability in there for us to use some of that money, should it pass. I just have to put the caveat there. It has the ability for us to do that good planning work that needs to be done, coordinate with everybody, create a map, and then move towards trying to actually program the projects, build them, and then actually do maintenance afterwards as well. So it's not all resting on the locals anymore, as we've done in the past.
That's amen. And I'll just add to that, Mayor Mag and WFRC work really closely with UDOT and develop plans for trail projects as well as road and transit projects. And if this gets funded, the one-time money, and then Miranda, you're probably about to move on to the bills, right? So, and then the ongoing money that would be created by SB 185, we will work, the local communities, the metropolitan planning organizations will work hand in hand with UDOT to figure out what are the priority investments to be made. So we will have that opportunity to collaborate and make sure we're making the best investments.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. So to kind of tie the bow on appropriations, I threw this in the chat and I'll kind of explain how to get there if you're not on, for those of us in the room. But I've also put together a appropriations tracker that you can find on our WFRC website under the government affairs page. It lists not only these priority appropriations that we are extremely supportive of and advocating for, but also lists a number of other appropriations that we are watching or interested in seeing how they are ultimately funded or not. So you can find that again on our government affairs webpage. I also included, you want to go to the next slide? I also included the link to our WFRC bill tracker. So we track a number of bills. I've listed a few bills here that I would consider priority legislation for WFRC. But there are, hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 bills now introduced in the legislature. And so we have, I don't know, maybe nearing 45 bills that we're watching right now and have included in our bill tracker that shows the whether it's a priority bill for WFRC, what our support or neutrality or opposition of a bill is, and then a summary and links to the bill. So feel free to spend some time in that if you're curious what else the legislature has proposed in the transportation, air quality, housing, land use space. And would also put a plug into some of our other partners that have bill trackers, including the Utah League of Cities and Towns and the Utah Association of Counties, because their trackers are a bit broader than what we're looking at here. So I have included a number of bills that we think you all should be aware of. I won't spend too much time on many of them. The one I do want to touch on a bit more is the transportation revisions bill, which includes the Utah Trails Network proposal. But just to touch on a few, the first one is House Bill 44. This is the Corridor Preservation Amendments Bill. This would allow UDOT to preserve corridors further into the future, as well as use the funds in the Corridor Preservation Fund for administrative costs so that they can more proactively do so. This also ties with an appropriation, like you saw on the last slide, over, I think it was 120 million proposed to further put into the Corridor Preservation Fund. Next is the Transportation Revisions Bill, SB 27. This has a number of UDOT related changes, but it's important to us at WFRC because it clarifies some important things related to station area plans or SAPs, which many of you may remember was passed last legislative session in House Bill 462, which would require cities with a fixed guideway transit station to plan for development around those areas. So this makes some clarifications and changes to that. Next is the HTRZ amendments. This is HB 84. Another bill that's important to WFRC. We've been working on HTRZs and the legislation on that over the past few years. Now with several HTRZ proposals having been proposed, this makes some clarifications and enhances what the HTRZ proposals require to be submitted to the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. SB 175 BNC road funds at one point would have impacted the BNC road funds, but no longer does so with the way it is currently drafted or substituted, and ultimately would create a rural transportation investment fund. So for cities in the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth class counties, not in a transit area, would be eligible to receive.
Cities and counties.
Cities and counties, thank you, Andrew, would be eligible to receive funding through this RTIF. And the funding into that fund would be 1% of the TIF would be transferred into that fund, which I think estimates are $9 million.
Let's say around $8 million a year.
Okay.
And I'll just add, so this is for those of you that are on here that are from Tooele County or from Morgan County or from Box Elder County, you would get a distribution from this fund that would be based on your weighted lane miles. So it'd be distributed by formula, but so this applies to you, council member, but it only, if I've got this right still, it only applies in counties that have adopted the so-called fourth quarter local option transportation sales tax. So if you did that local option sales tax, then your county gets the distribution from this new formula program.
Right. Thank you, Andrew.
And if that didn't make sense, talk to us later.
Yeah, yeah. We're breezing through this very quickly, and these are very complex pieces of legislation, so we're happy to talk about any of them with you. Next, SB 125, Transportation Infrastructure Amendments. This one is really exciting. We think it designates Aspire Research Center at Utah State University to be the lead entity to further coordinate transportation electrification within the state. So kind of be this hub and this organization that brings all partners together as we work towards electrification here in Utah. And as far as I know, Aspire is actually one of the leading entities in the country that's doing this. So I'll hit HB 301 unless, well, Andrew, you might want to touch on that one as well. And then we'll hit SB 185, but HB 301 does three critical things. One, it increases registration fees by $5. It provides or creates an electric vehicle charging tax. So currently there is no sales tax being collected on charge or the electricity that is being charged by people's electrical vehicles. This would now provide that charging tax on that electricity, not for residential homes, residential electric charging, but for retail. I guess you could call it like retail charging stations. And then lastly, what the bill does is it provides a short-term gas tax cut. Andrew, I don't know if you want to breeze over this or share a little bit more on it. But
you want to do it? Just do it quickly. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so ultimately it provides a short-term cut over the next few years. This was partly because of the increased gas prices that we have seen over the past few years. This is Representative Schultz. I actually put the wrong sponsor on there. It's Representative Schultz who is running this bill. And his desire is to give Utahns temporary relief from the gas tax increases that they've been seeing over the past year and a half or so, and would cut it temporarily, but would eventually bring it back up over time. So again, it can be somewhat complicated. We're happy to explain it a little bit further if you're interested.
The only thing I'll add on this is that the combination of a short-term bend down in the increase in gas tax rates, which have gone up faster than we anticipated, when coupled with the vehicle registration fee, is a way to give some temporary relief, but also think long-term about making sure we have adequate funding for the state. And then 30% of these dollars go to local communities, cities and counties. So to have a stable funding for basically for maintenance of our infrastructure over time. Short-term relief, long-term stability and funding. So we think it's good fiscal policy.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. And then lastly, we have transportation revisions by Senator Harper. This is SB 185. So most notably, as we've already kind of discussed here today, this includes the Utah Trails proposal, which would create the Active Transportation Investment Fund, or a new stable ongoing source of funding for active transportation projects throughout the state. Specifically non-paved or paved, non-motorized trails throughout the state. And as Terry had kind of shared some details about what UDOT is considering for this trails network proposal, this bill basically accomplishes that and gives UDOT the ability to start that planning process by giving them the funding that is needed to do so. Few other things, it extends the date for the fifth local option sales tax to be implemented. That would expire this year, but is being pushed out to 2026. There is another bill that is soon to be released that makes additional changes to the local option sales tax fifth by essentially giving counties who impose the fifth the opportunity to put that all towards transit or apportion it out to transit, cities, and counties. So 0.1 to transit, 0.5 to cities, and 0.5 to counties.
0.05, just for
0.05, sorry, thank you. So that's a separate bill, but both of these issues touch on that fifth. Second, it expands the state infrastructure bank for greenfield development. This also ties again with that $100 million request to put into the state infrastructure bank. And then lastly, it allows the road usage charge, which is the program in UDOT right now, which basically allows EV users to opt for this program and basically pay a per mile charge. It will basically allow those revenues to be distributed like the B&C formula funds instead of all just going to the transportation fund for state purposes. And so while there's not a lot of funding available in the RUC count right now, over time as it becomes adopted throughout the state and becomes more widely utilized, this will allow those funds to be dispersed in that way. So, and with that, I don't know that these next slides are really necessary or needed, but hurrah for the Utah Trail Network. We're very excited about this appropriation and bill in particular. And actually, if you hit the next slide, one thing I will note is that Utah's transportation partners, and hopefully many of you have signed this as well, but there's the Utah Trail Network letter that you could sign on to, supporting the effort and asking the legislature to fund and prioritize the trail network. We were able to distribute the letter and the over 400 signatures on this letter to the Senate earlier this week, and the bill passed unanimously out of the Senate, which is very positive. We're hoping for that same strong support in the House as it is currently working through that body. But ultimately, we're just very excited about the Trail Network. Again, priority appropriation, priority bill, and looking forward to the things that UDOT will do with that. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
And that letter,
Yeah.
Mike dropped that letter into the
Oh,
chat. So if
perfect.
you haven't signed it already, click on it and sign it. That's one thing we encourage multitasking only for that in this meeting, okay?
Okay, thank you all.
Well, thank you, Miranda. That brings us to our open public comment period. Is there anyone here from the public who is here to speak this afternoon? Okay, then we will move on and asked Wayne to cover our Transcom roles and responsibilities and then our schedule for this year. We're going to turn the time over to Wayne Benyon.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. So I'd like to, as we do at the beginning of each year, talk a bit about the importance of Transcom and the opportunities that this group presents. for each of us. And so I'll start by giving a bit of background and then talk briefly about roles, responsibilities, and schedule. So with that, thank you. Just a bit of context. As most of you are aware, Wasatch Front functions as a metropolitan planning organization and also as an association of governments, and is responsible for both long-range planning and short-range planning, working collaboratively with local governments and primarily UDOT and UTA as along with the local governments. And so, and both in terms of the being an association of governments as well as in terms of being an MPO, there are numerous opportunities and resources available, especially in the areas of transportation and growth. Oh, here we go. All right, and so you can see in the top center there, the regional council board, and then the two bigger boxes immediately below the regional council to the left and the right are the two policy advisory committees. Transcom, or the Transportation Coordinating Committee, is the policy advisory committee for short-range planning, and the Regional Growth Committee, or RGC, is the policy advisory committee for long-range planning. And each of those policy advisory committees are supported by two technical advisory committees, one in each urbanized area. So in your meeting materials, you'll see a memorandum of agreement that was signed a number of years ago, and that establishes both Transcom and the Regional Growth Committee, outlines the membership and a bit of the roles there, with the intent to have in place a continuous, comprehensive, and cooperative regional transportation planning process. And then so the three primary roles for Transcom include advising the regional council on short-range planning and programming, taking action on various programs and projects, and providing a forum for discussion of those programs and projects and other near-term efforts related to transportation and growth. So before talking about the responsibilities and schedule for the year, it's helpful to have a bit of context. We refer to the Transportation Improvement Program every meeting, and so I just want to give a bit of background as to what that is. Basically a compilation over the next 6 years of highway transit and active transportation projects and programs to which funding has been committed for major capacity highway and transit projects. Those projects first have to come from, or it's the practice to have those come from the first phase of the regional transportation plan. And so there's a tie, that's one of the several ties between the Regional Growth Committee and Transcom, is that those major capacity highway and transit projects need to come from the first phase of the regional transportation plan in order to have funding committed to them within the Transportation Improvement Program. And so not only is the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, multimodal, it also includes all funding sources, whether federal, state, or local. And so the responsibilities of Transcom often revolve around the Transportation Improvement Program. A few of Transcom's key responsibilities include approving the draft for release for public comment once those lists of projects have been compiled, recommend the TIP to the Regional Council for approval, and also recommend amendments or board modifications to the TIP, And also another key responsibility, the regional council as the MPO, as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, has responsibility for programming funds in a few transportation programs, including those listed here on the screen. And I'll just note the carbon reduction program is a new program, and you'll hear more about that later in the meeting. And then in terms of schedule, in the meeting materials, you've got a detailed list of intended, or at least topics that are likely to be included for each of the 5 times Transcom meets during the year. And you can see the dates relating to those key responsibilities that I mentioned earlier. In addition, in October, we email out the letters of intent that are each fall, the regional council solicits applications primarily from cities and counties for those 4 funding programs. And we email out the letters of intent that have been received just to make sure we're not missing any letters of intent. And then at the bottom of that schedule for the year are potential additional discussion topics. We would love to hear any additional input or ideas on topics you would like to see us cover at any of the Transcom meetings so that we can get those on the agenda and have some decent discussion about those topics that are particularly of interest to the members of Transcom. That's the information I have.
Very good. Thank you, Wayne. While he's up there, is there anything that has popped in your head that you want us to cover over this year, that you want us to get onto an agenda? Okay.
Thank you. And if ideas come to mind in the future, don't hesitate to reach out to Mayor Shepherd or myself, and we'll be happy to get them on the agenda. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Wayne. We have Wayne referenced the tip, and we have some modifications. We first have an unusual one. We have a staff modification, and then a board modification after that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Ben. I was trying to go with Sugar, but it just didn't work. We'll go with Ben and have him give us these modifications.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in reviewing the Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP, just to summarize what Wayne went over and reviewed with us, in the Transportation Improvement Program, we implement the long-range plans for the highway transit and the active transportation projects. Those projects also help us meet the short-range needs along the area, and they provide for the maintenance of our existing transportation system. So a significant role Transcom plays in the transportation system along the Wasatch Front. So today there are 4 items that we'll specifically address to the TIP. Item 5A in the agenda is a report on a staff mod, not something we normally need to bring to this body, but something that we felt was appropriate and necessary to talk to you today. Item 5B is a report on the approved board mod with the regional council. Item 5C is a new board mod to come before you today for review and approval. And then item 5D is to review the federal funds that were obligated during the past federal fiscal year. So the very first one here is our staff modification. Now, there's 3 levels in our board modification, or the modification or amendment process to the TIP. There's a staff level, then there's a board level, and then there's an amendment or a full amendment that needs to go, requires a lot more effort. Generally, the staff modifications are things that we take care of behind the scenes to keep the programs moving forward, keep the projects moving forward. And there's a lot of them that take place, and we work with the local governments as well as with UDOT and UTA. But today, as you may recall, back in 2021, Congress approved the Infrastructure Investment Act, or well, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, or the IIJA. It's also referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Well, in this law, it authorized the carbon reduction program, the new program that Wayne referenced right here. And this program was implemented there to reduce transportation emissions by funding projects designed to reduce carbon dioxide. Well, that brings another resource to the Wasatch Front Regional Council. That brings us 5 years of funding from federal fiscal year 2022 through federal fiscal year 2026. During the process, when this bill was approved or authorized back in 2021, the authorization and the guidelines didn't come forward for the carbon dioxide or the CRP carbon reduction program until we were midway through the 2023 process. So we hadn't looked at it. We won't look at, we did not look at it until we initiated the 2024 TIP process. So best case scenario, our brand new projects that we'll have an opportunity to bring before this body to move forward and be programmed with these funds will be constructed in the year 2025. Well, that caused us a little concern. And as staff, we began to review and look over the programmed years that were there. And we identified that we had a concern with the federal fiscal year 2022 and the federal fiscal year 2023, and potentially a concern there in 2024. So we proposed an idea and we went to Federal Highways to push this idea around and see what would work and if it was appropriate. And they gave us the okay to move forward on it. So what we did is identified, or what the plan was, is to identify projects that were already approved in the program, that were reviewed by this body, were recommended to the regional council, and they approved those projects. But those projects needed, one, to be eligible for the requirements for the congestion or the carbon reduction program. And they had to be in a position that we were able to do so, meaning that we hadn't already implemented something forward, or that the project hadn't already had expenditures against. So we went through the list of CMAQ program because we thought and felt that the CMAQ program, we'd already gathered the type of information that was necessary to look at in that carbon reduction program. In that, we were able to, and we, with the help and the expertise of Kevin Cromar and Olivia Wang, we were able to prioritize 9 projects. Now, those 9 projects, we based on the ratio of climate benefit to project estimated cost. Pretty fancy term. But what it is this value represents the social cost of each project's CO2 emissions in 2020 dollars. We were able to identify 4 transit projects that would work in this scenario. We were able to identify 2 intersection projects that were able to work in this scenario, along with 1 bike and ped, and along with 1 truck electrification. That was good news. It worked out great. There were actually 44 projects that we were evaluating that were eligible, and we pushed them through. What that did is that enabled us to put project ready programmed in 2022, meaning that those funds that were set aside or allocated for 2022, that we'd have projects that were ready that could spend those funds. We'd have projects ready programmed for those funds for 2023. And we partially funded those funds available in federal fiscal year 2024 for the projects. That enabled us to have the 4+ million, the 4.05+ million there, that is annual appropriations in the CRP program, plus the leftover in the federal fiscal year 2024. So about $6.5 million we will have to program this year when we bring projects before this body. But here's another awesome thing, that by moving those projects forward in the CMAQ program into the CRP program, we were able to advance them. Some of them we were able to advance 4 or 5 years. That freed up space, enabling us to compact the program or bring other CMAQ projects forward. But it also enabled us to prepare for programming 9.7 plus million more this year when we bring projects before you. So it was a win-win project for this process. And that enables us to move forward with the CO, or the carbon reduction program. The biggest concern that we had is if we didn't do anything beforehand, we were fearful that we would have funding lapse because it takes at least 2, if not 3 years to get a project through approval, through the TIP process, through the federal process before it can get constructed. So if we were to start right now, like we are with the 2025 program, at best, it would be 2028 before we'd have projects ready. Right now, no one's saying this program will end, but right now we've only got funding out through federal year 2026. So this was a way to keep those funds up front so that we wouldn't lose any of the monies. Any questions on that?
Hey, Ben, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll just add, so a second benefit by these CMAQ projects happening now, not only are we avoiding lapse in the CRP program funds, but we're also achieving a cost savings because they're happening sooner rather than later. The sooner a project gets under construction, the less dollars it's going to cost.
Thank you, Wayne. Kevin, I don't know, I appreciate your help. Is there anything you might add or?
I played a very minor role. I was really impressed with staff, how they pulled this off and pulled it together. I actually mentioned it to some colleagues and led to, long story short, the Rockefeller Foundation. They host an annual meeting to talk about like great things cities are doing with planning. And they asked if I would come to Albany next month and share this kind of anecdote. And I usually turn down these types of offers, but an opportunity to come sing the praise of WFRC and show how using a quantitative approach to prioritize projects and how that's a good planning process. I'm going to go speak to that next month in Albany. So I'll let you guys know how that goes, but an opportunity to sing your praises I'll always take. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. I want to add one piece to this. Some of you may be thinking, why did you go through this in so much detail with us? And the reason is that we feel, particularly when implementing a new policy or program, that it's really important that we share with you the approaches that we're considering and make sure that you feel comfortable and see if you have any questions about them. And so obviously there's time for comments or questions here still, if anybody has any. And one just popped up. Mayor Hall is saying that, Ben, last year you used ice cream to educate us. And so there wasn't any ice cream this time, but maybe at a subsequent meeting that'll happen again, right?
Yes.
I'll also say that this is a good federal program, and sometimes it is challenging to implement all the programs that proliferate from the federal legislation. And what we always try to do is be as efficient and effective as possible in putting those funds to use. And so I echo what Kevin said, that our team working with FHWA, I know Ivan Marrero from FHWA is on with us, the ability to have flexibility to achieve program goals, but put the money to use as quickly as possible and be efficient in our administration is something that we're always trying to do with all of the federal programs. So thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Mr. Chair, that's all of part A.
Okay, well then, are there any questions for Ben on part A? Let's move on to part B.
Awesome, thank you. So in part A and B, well, actually, so part B brings us to the board modification that was reviewed by the regional council and approved at their meeting on the 26th. In your materials is a copy of the resolution along with the 4 tables that identify the projects that were reviewed and approved in that board modification.
You want to explain real quick to those that are here, the difference in who approved those, why that one was approved there and this one, and we'll handle ours today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So essentially, almost every time we have a meeting, about every month, we have a board modification because of the dynamics of the projects, whether their funding's changing or the project opportunities that are coming before us. Working with UTA, working with UDOT and the local governments, there's a lot of dynamics that are taking place. So the board modifications, which normally what we bring before this body, require action. And if the regional council is not meeting in the month that we receive a board request or a modification request, then that responsibility has been delegated to Transcom and we take care of it. Now, one practice that we've also tried to implement is if there's a project that's funded with one of the resources that WFRC oversees, and it goes through our technical advisory committees, I was going to say, try to make sure, but this is what happens. We take that to the tax, and then that board mod always comes before Transcom, where you make the recommendations on approval of that type. But other board modifications, it depends on the timing of when they come.
Thanks. I just wanted to be able to clarify that because you're just presenting everything that we just, that there B, I should say, was everything that we just took care of at our board meeting.
Thank you.
So, thanks.
Okay, then item number C, and before I go to this board modification here that's before Transcom for your review and approval, I'd like you to be aware of that it's important to note that the projects included in this proposed amendment or board modification are either included in phase 1 of the regional transportation plan or are not regionally significant or are exempt projects that do not need to be reviewed for conformity and consistency with the state implementation plan according to the federal law. Thus, they do not require a 30-day public comment period, but a review and a comment opportunity is available at this meeting. And that's true with all the board mods that we take to each of the meetings if we don't have a 30-day public comment period. So in this board modification, we have 3 projects. There's actually 2 tables attached to the resolution, which should be included in your meeting material. We'll go through those 3 projects fairly quickly. The first project is a project up in Weber County. This is a UDOT-sponsored project. It's actually in Ogden. It's on Grand Mercy Avenue. It's a bridge over the Ogden River. The intent here is to perform a full bridge replacement of the structure. The existing structure is currently in very poor condition and has been posted for load restrictions. This structure is not on the federal aid highway system, therefore no local agency match is required under the Bridge Fund program. This new project or this bridge is estimated to cost $3.3 million, and that's the estimated total project cost. The next project that we have is actually something that impacts all of us. And this involves the wrong way driving. UDOT has researched wrong way driving detection systems and has selected a technology and a product line that will best integrate with the state system and partners. The project team has identified and prioritized a list of 20 locations to implement this to start with. The system is designed, and maybe let me show you a little on the system here. So here would be the first sign there at the control box going up the ramp. And if you look way down there is what this other sign to the left looks like. So here's what the guy, and I had to go low, sorry, but here, if you're going the wrong way on the ramp, here's what you would see. First, you would see these signs and they look pleasing unless you're the one in the car going the wrong way. All of a sudden you get the warning lights on all of the signs and you get a bright white light that shines right in to catch the attention of the driver. So the system is designed to monitor individual ramps for wrong way traffic, provide notifications when an incident occurs, and provide an in-field feedback to alert the wrong way driver and to alert those rescue vehicles that can go and attend to the need. So this is brand new. This project is estimated to cost $2.5 million to implement at these 20 strategic locations. And the total project cost is estimated at $2.5 million. That brings us to the last board mod, which is a project on I-80. This particular project here is a UDOT request on I-80. This project here addresses on I-80 from 13th East to 2300 East, as well as I-215, 33rd South to 4500 South. This project was initially advertised in the fall of 2020 and awarded in the spring of 2021. There was other things that were happening during that time period called COVID. And the effects of the COVID environment related compounding events. There was trucking shortages, there were material shortages, and there were labor shortages. And that greatly affected the schedule of this project. This project will reconstruct I-80 between 1300 East and 2300 East, as well as I-215 between 33rd South and 4500 South. It'll also replace those bridges on 13th and 17th and 20th East, as well as rehab the bridge there on 23rd. And then there'll also be an additional travel lane on I-80. The request here, this is what's cool. So here's a bridge here on 1300 East that they built right offside. Here's another view, and you can look right down I-80. But they built this bridge just to the west of the project, and then when it was all ready, they slid it into place, so it didn't negatively impact anybody. Innovative. UDOT is amazing in the way they take care of these projects. But the request to finish this project, because of all the things that have happened, the delay of project really impacted quite a few things. With the traffic control, the maintenance and administration activities, materials and labor, the winter concrete, because the project carried through an additional season, additional culverts. Anyway, the request here is to add an additional $34 million to this project, making the total project cost an estimated of $180.5 million. Oh, wonderful.
So it's a dedicated rail line, right?
Yes, yeah, somewhere on there. So that is all of that board mod, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any questions for Ben in regards to these modifications? Okay, seeing none, I entertain a motion on these
Motion
modifications.
to approve those modifications, Mr. Chair, is presented today by the very capable Ben Worthwich.
Thank you, Commissioner Harvey. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And we have a second from Mayor Smolka. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Chair, if I may, for those of you that missed the opportunity to watch them slide the 1700 East Bridge into place, I believe the 1300 East Bridge will be slid into place in April. Does that sound right, Terry? That's what we heard last Friday on the Transportation Commission tour, was their estimated date. If you want more information or would like to find out how to watch them slide a bridge into place, let us know. Thanks.
I'd like to register my interest right now. That's where I live, and I go over that bridge and that on-ramp. So I don't know if this is Brad or somebody, but I want to go, please.
And I think we should do ice cream. Okay, sound good?
That's not allowable on a job site.
Okay, any opposed? All right.
Oh, sorry.
That's unanimous then.
Discussion on the motion. Sorry.
That was the discussion on the motion after we'd already, yeah, okay, never mind. And then let's jump into D.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So D is our report on the obligations that took place in 2022. And that thumping noise, I thought that was my heart there first.
The festivities just as mentioned, the music and the activities are starting outside.
Oh,
So
This is what you'll have to deal with here for the next 2 days.
so as in the past transportation bills, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, or IIJA, requires that each MPO, state and public transportation operators cooperate in preparing a list of projects for which the federal transportation funds were obligated for spending during the immediate preceding year. WFRC has worked with UDOT and UTA, and we prepared and compiled a list of those projects and would like to review that now. But to initiate that, I'd like to review the definition of obligation. Obligation is the federal government's legal commitment to reimburse the state or other entities for the federal share of a project's eligible cost. Something that's important for this particular report is the obligated projects were not necessarily initiated or completed during this year. We may see them on the list for multiple years. The other part is obligated amounts reflected in this report may also not be equal to the final project cost. Those are important when you're going through and happen to see a name of your city's project, wondering why those dollar values might not match up with something that you're looking at. So, how does that work? Well, this is statewide, and we've taken all the myriad amounts of projects and we've combined them into these 7 columns. We've tried to silo all the types. We've got pavement preservation, we've got the reconstruction or capacity, the miscellaneous, we've got intersection and safety, bridge, and then we've got the smaller structures, and then we've got ATMS, and then we have bike and ped and transit. So how does that work? Well, let's look at this very first column just for an example quickly on the pavement preservation, this column here. We're seeing an obligation amount of $161+ million. Well, that means there is a list. If you were to look at all those projects that were part of this one, there's 143 projects. Of those 143, 86 projects had over 180 million that was obligated. Now, of that 143, 54 projects had 19+ million that was deobligated. Now, deobligated is a good thing. That means the funds are cost savings or something happened and those funds are coming back into the program. So we have a total of 143 projects with $161+ million in obligation. So that's how each of those numbers will read for the silos. So this is statewide. There was over $530 million that were obligated. That's just the federal portion were obligated across the state. If we were to look at just the Wasatch Front area, there's a little more than 300 million over the Wasatch Front area. Now that's amazing. If you look at everything that's going on, about 300 million, and some of that bleeds over the borders as the project doesn't stop at the county or the MPO boundaries. But that is a tremendous amount of work that's going on in the Wasatch Front area. Now, if we were to zero down just a little more, well, I should say in your meeting materials, these are the tables of all the projects that are part of those or that are taking place in the Wasatch Front area. There's 14 pages, the list of projects identified by the funding source and any amount of federal funds obligated or deobligated for the project. Then if we zero in and get the Wasatch Front, how does the Wasatch Front projects compare to those other maps? Well, you can see the resurfacing or the surfacing improvements. Wasatch Front, our funds do not do preservation type projects. Our funds are reconstructing or greater, but sometimes part of a project may be considered surfacing rehab or pavement preservation. So there is a little funding there, but you can see the reconstruction or capacity is the bulk of our money. Now, I might point out on each of these that almost all the pavement preservation, the reconstruction and capacity projects include an active transportation component. So if we were to scroll all the way to the end and we see bike, ped, and transit type projects for 4.6+ million, that's not all of the active transportation projects. Those are just the projects that were specifically funded for that type, bike, ped, and transit. So there's a lot of funds that are going into the various types, but in the Wasatch Front area, we had over $41 million of federal funds obligated. You can see how that breaks out into programs, STP 28+, in the Salt Lake, STP in the Ogden Layton areas, a little more than 3, CMAQ was 6.3, and TAP was 1.9. Next year, we'll have the CRP program on there as well. Behind this graph is also a copy of each of the tables that highlights the projects that received or had obligation or deobligation. So you can look at each of those programs. Then after this, we have the transit administration. So in the transit, we have that there was 51% of those funds in capital improvements, 49% in operation and planning and maintenance. That's pretty close. The graph makes it look a lot more different, but it's really just a few million in the difference there. So well done for UTA. But behind this table is also a table that has all of those projects of the capital and the operation and maintenance type projects. So this would be the report on the federal obligations of the 2022 fiscal year.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions for Ben? There's a lot of work going into that. So thank you for in every one of those things today. Appreciate that. Wayne?
Just one supplemental for context. Federal dollars are about typically 20% of the revenue that is received for transportation for both transit and highway. So a lot of state highway dollars and a lot of local transit dollars in addition to the federal dollars shown in these graphs and tables.
Thank you, Wayne.
And I'll add to that, that Utah, relative to other states in the nation, I think it is either the smallest or among the smallest percentages of our total transportation investment that comes from federal funds. This is true even with the new federal bill, which mainly provides formula funding. So we got increases in our formula funding that has allowed us to keep pace with inflation. The discretionary funding programs that we're able to compete for, which we are in the process of applying for and competing for, provides another source of funding that we're seeking. But just overall, our state and our regions have made a significant commitment to investing in multimodal transportation. As we were talking about before, the federal funding is essential, but it's not the pot that drives the ship. That was a terrible metaphor, but you get what my point. My point is the minority share of our investment in transportation. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
I'm not going to touch that one. It's just not. Yeah, we're not. Okay, well, thank you, Ben. And then we've got a report on an update on our safe streets and roads for all. I'll turn the time over to Kip.
Speaking of federal grants, this is exciting.
There. Usually when I report to this or other groups, I'm wearing my air quality hat. And today I'm wearing my safety hat. I've had a safety hat in my office for years and years. With this new program, I actually have an opportunity to wear it and talk about some resources that are available to cities and counties for safety improvements. So the Safe Streets for All is a new program under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And as I mentioned, it's designed and intended for local governments. As we understand it, this is a new program, so we're learning as this is rolled out. But as we understand it, it's not going to be another item under Ben's TIP projects. This will end up being between federal highways and the local government. But Wasatch Front got involved because as this program, awareness of this program came about, different cities and counties were interested in getting involved. And we soon learned that the very first step they wanted was a regional approach to safety, kind of a blueprint for safety for the region, rather than each community doing different things. So they reached out to Wasatch Front, and that's how we became involved. So I'll tell you a little bit about Safe Streets for All, sometimes abbreviated SS4A. The Jobs Act budgeted $1 billion annually for the next 5 years for this program. These are nationally competitive grants, which means there's not a formula that allocates a certain amount for each state. So it's kind of asking ye shall receive, or maybe ye might receive. And it is exclusively for local governments. The state is not eligible to receive these funds. The safety improvements are for roadways, and in this case, primarily locally owned roadways. Now, if your safety priority happens to be a state road, coordination with the state is possible if that's what your priority is. But the state has resources for safety improvements for state roads. So the projects do require a 20% local match. That's a little different than other federal programs. So I guess they want to see if you're really serious about making those improvements. And as I mentioned, the first step is this comprehensive safety action plan, sometimes just called action plan. And so we're doing this on a regional basis. The Wasatch Front was recently awarded the $775,000 for this project with our local match. That means we have close to $1 million to work with to do this action plan. We put together this planning team to go through this process and review our documents and how we're making these applications. And so we've had participation from each of the counties, a handful of cities, and we've sent out notices to all members of the council. If you're interested in participating, get back to us and be happy to invite you to the planning team meetings.
Kip, can I just also note, this is for Mayor Lundberg's benefit, MAG, Mountain Land Association of Governments, was also given a similar award like we got. So we're going to do this safety planning all across the region.
So let me tell you a little bit about what goes into the action plan. This is a lot of these components are defined by federal highways under this Safe Streets for All. One of the first steps was to identify a goal and a timeline, something along the lines of what UDOT has done with the zero fatalities, something like that. The Wasatch Front Regional Council doesn't have to be the forum for doing that, but it seems like that might be a convenient forum for establishing those goals. There will be an analysis of crashes by severity and location. And UDOT has collected this data for a number of years and has a very thorough, organized database for looking at that. UDOT also has a database they call the Roadway Assessment Program. And we think that's something that sets the state apart from most other states in the country. It's based on a video surveillance of all of the roads in the state at 100-meter segments. And then that's digitized into a database, and we're able to identify roadways that may be deficient in certain safety attributes. And we think that will be really valuable in this process. That would be helpful in identifying strategies that are most cost effective. The Federal Highways is encouraging low cost strategies that can be applied region-wide, but the action plan will help us identify priorities going forward. So let me give you a quick summary of where we are right now and what's coming next. So we've been awarded the grant. Next, we have to sign a grant agreement with Federal Highways. And at the same time, we'll be preparing to advertise for a request of statement of qualifications. So we hope to get that completed in the next few months, and ideally by spring of this year, we will have a contract with a consultant to prepare this action plan. We anticipate, we'd like more time to do the study, but we targeted May of 24 to have it completed. So then the cities and counties will have that resource available to them to then identify projects that they would like to implement to improve safety in their communities. And assuming 2022 was the pattern for when those grant requests would be due, we're looking at September of 24. So might want to note that in your calendars. Again, that will be a grant request between the local government and federal highways. After the action plan is completed, the role of Wasatch Front will be diminished as far as implementing Safe Streets for All. We will be involved in, I failed to mention that the action plan will identify some reporting mechanisms to track progress. And so we would be bringing that information back to the council. So that's the information I had on Safe Streets for All. There are any questions about this new program?
Hey, Kip, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Appreciate that. Brings us to other business. Andrew, do you have anything for us?
No, other than to note that Councilmember Dugan from Salt Lake City dropped in the chat that Salt Lake City joined the Vision Zero network with the goal of eliminating, this is blocked for some reason, traffic fatalities. So this issue of safety is one that's been on all of our minds. It's always been on our mind for roadway incidents. There have been an increase in pedestrian and bike accidents and deaths, sadly. And so this is something that's at the forefront of UDOT's mind. And now this work with the safety action plan for cities and counties. So it's important.
Okay, very good. Just a note then, we have coming up on the 23rd is our new committee member orientation. So everybody's invited, whether you're new or old, or you just have nothing to do that day. And then our next meeting here will be April 27th. And before we leave, we have open meetings.
Oh, yeah. I just want to say that the new member orientation is just virtual
Yes,
only.
it's virtual.
You're always welcome here, but that is just a virtual meeting.
And then if you have, we know that a lot of you have already gone through the Open Meetings Act training. We do that at the first meeting that we have each year to keep us legal and compliant. So we have an 8-minute video. If you want to stick around for it, you are welcome to stick around. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn after that video is over. I'd entertain a motion now, but you know.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. So we will stand adjourned as once that video is over. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
So what's the Open and Public Meetings Act? It's the state law that ensures government actions and deliberations are openly conducted. Before we continue, keep in mind that this video is an overview, and exceptions may exist based on your entity type. So what's considered an open and public meeting? It's when a governing body majority meets to discuss or act upon government business. It includes the meetings sometimes referred to as workshops or executive sessions. Regular meetings, public hearings, electronic meetings, and emergency meetings are all open and public meetings. Open and public meetings don't include chance or social meetings. A public hearing is a type of open and public meeting where citizens have a reasonable opportunity to speak. Public hearings happen when a government adopts a budget or imposes or increases taxes or fees. An electronic meeting is a type of open and public meeting that's convened electronically, such as via phone or the internet. Remember, the governing body must adopt a resolution, rule, or ordinance allowing and governing electronic meetings. An open and public meeting may be closed to discuss any of the following: a person's character, competence, or health, security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, collective bargaining, litigation, purchase, sale, or lease of property if an open discussion would prevent the entity from completing the transaction on the best terms, investigations of criminal misconduct, and private or protected information per the Utah Procurement Code, including trade secrets. 2/3 of the governing body need to vote yes to close a meeting. Quick math lesson. 2 divided by 3 equals 66.7%. Let's say your governing body has 5 members. If 3 out of the 5 members vote yes, that equals 60%, which is not equal to or greater than 66.7%, which means you're 1 member short and instead need 4 out of 5 members to vote yes. During a closed meeting, a governing body can't interview someone applying to fill an elected position, discuss filling a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, discuss the character, competence, or health of a person whose name was submitted for consideration to fill a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, or approve any ordinance, resolution, rule, regulation, contract, or appointment. If a closed meeting is discussing a person's character, competence, or health, or security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, no recording or minutes are required. However, the presiding member needs to sign a sworn written statement stating such. If the closed meeting is held for any other reason, a recording must be made. Emergency meetings may be held to discuss an urgent matter due to unforeseen circumstances. In order to hold the meeting, the best notice that's feasible is provided of the time, location, and topics to be considered. An attempt is made to contact all governing body members, and a governing body majority approves the meeting. Entities that hold regular meetings need to provide notice at least annually of the year's meeting schedule. As always, the notice must include date, time, and place. For entities that don't hold regularly scheduled regular meetings, 24 hours notice must be provided. All meetings, whether regularly scheduled in advance over the course of the year or scheduled as needed, must provide no less than 24 hours notice of meeting agendas. If a public hearing is held, public notice requirements change. Make sure to distinguish between regular meeting notice requirements and public hearing notice requirements. For regular meetings, an entity is only required to notify a newspaper and doesn't need to pay to publish a notice. For public hearings, notice must be published in at least 1 issue of a newspaper. If a newspaper of general circulation isn't available, written notice is posted in 3 public places within the entity's boundaries. Regular meetings require 24 hours notice. Public hearings require 7 days notice. For both regular meetings and public hearings, written notice must be posted at the principal office of the governing body, or, if no such office exists, at the building where the meeting will be held. Governing bodies must also provide notice of open and public meetings on the Public Notice website at publicnotice.utah.gov. By posting on the website and providing the email of the local newspaper, governing bodies can also meet the requirement to notify a newspaper. However, other requirements such as publishing in a newspaper still apply. Typically, posting on the Public Notice website is done by the records officer, recorder, or clerk. However, it's the governing body's responsibility to ensure notice is provided. State Archives has prepared a training manual and quick guide for owners and posters, as well as training videos that can be accessed at their website at archives.utah.gov. If your entity is increasing a fee or undergoing truth and taxation for a property tax increase, be aware that there are additional notice and posting requirements. Public meeting agendas need to include reasonably specified topics to be considered, with each topic listed under a separate agenda item on the meeting agenda. The governing body may not consider a topic in an open meeting that wasn't on the agenda. If a new topic not on the agenda is raised by the public during an open meeting, the governing body may discuss the topic. However, final action may not be taken on the new topic during that meeting. Meeting minutes and an audio recording are required for all open meetings, with limited exceptions. When an open or closed meeting is required to be recorded, it must be unedited and contain all the portions of the meeting. Recordings of open meetings must be made available within 3 days. Every entity needs to establish procedures for the governing body's approval of minutes. Pending minutes are written minutes prepared in draft form and are subject to change before being approved by the governing body. Pending minutes must contain a clear indication, such as a draft or pending watermark, that the governing body hasn't yet approved the minutes and that they're subject to change. Pending minutes must be made available within 30 days. Approved minutes are written minutes of a meeting that have been approved by the governing body. Approved minutes are the official record of the meeting and must be made available within 3 business days. Whoever is responsible for taking the minutes during meetings, typically the records officer, recorder, or clerk, needs to be familiar with what OPMA requires be contained in the minutes. When a governing body closes a meeting, the following must be publicly announced and entered into the minutes of the open meeting at which the closed meeting was approved. The reason or reasons for holding the closed meeting, the location where the closed meeting will be held, and the vote of each member of the governing body either for or against the motion to close the meeting. The recording and any minutes must include the date, time, and location of the meeting, the names of the governing body members present and absent, and the names of all others present except where disclosure would infringe on the confidentiality necessary to fulfill the original purpose of closing the meeting. For more information, access our local government resource center at resources.auditor.utah.gov.